we'll kick things right off and get moving. Full screen this. All right, big items up front. So just as yet another reminder, we've got BIP 45 and BIP 46, which I forgot to put in that it's the Hibernate up for vote right now. And then Temp Check 4 is also up for vote. And actually, just as another quick mention, so Breen's Temp Check for the L2 migration is now live as well. I've got that down at the bottom of this slide. But yeah, if whenever anybody gets a chance to run over to the governance site right after they vote on the BIPs that are up, they can take a look at both Temp Check 4 and Temp Check 5 now and get their voices heard. So as for upcoming and ongoing items, so wstETH and Multiflow version 1.1 are currently in audit remediation. So I'm moving forward with those. Something that folks will notice as we go through this presentation is that we've had some consolidation of components. So there's a missing comma too. Geez. Tractor and Secure Beanstalk all over the place, looks like. Tractor and Secure Beanstalk have been combined with other improvements. So Generalized Convert, Generalized Flood, and a handful of others into what we're calling Beanstalk 3. So obviously any of the devs can comment, but the way that I see this is really, it's maybe the right way to look at it is like an audit package. So a group of improvements that for the sake of making the audit move as efficiently as possible have kind of been grouped together. And we've got a slide on that a little bit later in the presentation. And folks that are watching will see the combination of some of those items. You'll see some stuff that was previously had its own slide dedicated has now been consolidated. So really just trying to make sure that group of code is as clean and well packaged as possible to make the auditing process smooth. Any questions about any of these items besides my typos? All right, hearing none. And I will clean these up and I'll reissue this deck as soon as we're done. So projects and initiatives. So we've got a handful of small changes, a couple additions, the ones that I would point out. So primarily in that top of the funnel, we've got the addition of the 2 temp checks that we've been talking about. So debt restructuring and the L2 migration. So those, since they're in temp check, they're in a little bit more active discussion. There's some talk about how to approach those. So we put those in the top of the funnel so that they could be identified as being closer to active development. And then just looking through some notes and having some conversations, I added Hard Hat Foundry test suite change. And for what it's worth, from a user standpoint, that change isn't going to have much practical effect on day-to-day usage. It's an important change on the back end, and I'm sure there's a little bit more information that could be found or posted about just that change in terms of testing suite and how that makes not only some of the dev work a little bit easier, but also a lot of the auditing work. It sounds like Foundry is a more widely used and more robust in terms of tools. So generally a better choice. So making that change from Hard Hat to Foundry on the back end over time. I think everything else has been talked about or covered in past DAO meetings. So I'll open it up quickly. Any comments or questions on this information? Okay. So someone just come off mute? Okay. Must have been real quick. So to get down into the projects themselves, so Seed Gauge, obviously everyone's familiar with the project itself and situation where, coming down to the second set of votes. Again, if you have not had a chance to go over to the governance site and put your votes in, please do that. We still have a few hours left, still a little ways away from quorum. So yeah, if you have a chance to and have not yet, please go over and vote on that item. Probably not much more to cover here for now. So we'll jump down to wstETH migration.
I guess I would just add
yeah,
that
sure.
It feels like, kind of an underlying assumption of a lot of these slides and the ones upcoming are assuming, BIPs pass the first time or so. So, it's hard to know at this point. It looks like we're like 77-ish% towards quorum. So I think a non-zero chance we're able to get there this time, but it's not looking particularly bright. So yeah, it's unclear. I guess one thing that I don't think made it onto these slides is that quorum change proposal under Town Square that would encourage everyone to check out and read and share thoughts on. At least from Beanstalk Farm's perspective, it's a little bit hard to know why exactly the BIPs aren't passing. Obviously it's like ultimately you just have to input a lot of the qualitative data in the Discord with regards to what people are talking about, whether people are talking about being for or against the seed gauge BIP, or whether there's comments or FUD about other stuff. So it's a bit hard to know in practice, but at least in my opinion, think it would make sense at least attempt some sort of governance change, given that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of input with regards to the gauge system being bad or implemented improperly or things like that.
Yeah, agreed. All right. And yeah, I will actually, that's another good item for me to add to this deck. I'll just add it up into that prior slide about with the funnel chart. So to jump down to wstETH, so we're now in remediation for those CodeHawks audit items. So obviously the process is moving along well there. Again, to kind of highlight Guy's point, we've got the week of June 17th as a target deployment time period. But again, there is an assumption there that, that like the other items, that these are passing on the first round of proposal.
I would just add that the way that these are implemented sort of assume that the previous BIP is implemented, i.e. in this case, the wstETH, whitelisting and migration, although, somewhat fairly separate in principle, does assume a lot of the gauge system infrastructure changes are made. So obviously, if there was a lot of pushback on, hey, gauge system bad, wstETH good, that work could probably be done to separate them. But given that there isn't that discussion or commentary, I feel like I just want to point out that this one is difficult to ship before the gauge system passes, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that, Guy.
So these do have to be proposed sequentially to some extent. Not have to for the reasons I described earlier, but that certainly would be the path of least resistance, if that makes sense.
All right, jumping down to Multiflow 1.1, again, probably not a whole lot to cover in terms of rediscussing the contents of the project itself. Everyone seems pretty familiar, but again, just to loop back, we're now into the remediations portion of the audit. So a lot of good progress there, and now it's just the process of taking care of those remediation items. All right, miscellaneous improvements. So in this case, we're again through the vast majority of development. We're into the judging phase, so active conversations happening with the code team right now. Personally, have not seen a lot that that indicates any major questions or concerns through that judging phase. Obviously, Dead Man, Breen, Guy, feel free to add any color or anything, but it seems like that process is moving along pretty smoothly.
Yeah, and just to make the same point I made earlier, that the path of least resistance is shipping the miscellaneous improvements BIP after the wstETH BIP.
Okay, Beanstalk 3. So as I mentioned earlier, there were a handful of items, Skier Beanstalk, Tractor, Gen Convert, that have been consolidated and packaged into essentially the Beanstalk 3 audit package. So right now we've got the Cyphern team engaged, the CodeHawks team engaged, and starting to move forward with that audit process. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to cover here, a lot of things that people have been talking about for quite a while. I don't know if there's anything that the team wants to talk about specifically, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of items in this package that that have gotten a lot of discussion around the farm for the last handful of months.
I mean, I guess to talk a little bit about the rationale for combining some of these things, it feels like with these development, design development cycles, the audit in particular has been a bottleneck, and particularly with regards to, these sequential BIPs, for example, where, the gauge system BIP ended almost 2 months ago, the wstETH BIP audit ended at the end of April, and, we're more or less catching up, and, well, clearly we're ready to propose the seed gauge BIP a couple weeks ago when it was proposed. But there's been this sort of lag, and at least in my view, since we sort of made this call to combine a few of these and try to launch something on the Beanstalk anniversary on August 6th, as you can see in like the lower right corner of this slide, I think that development has really picked up. So, as Rex mentioned, a couple of these have already been talked about at length, although, happy to answer questions myself, or I know a couple of people working on these changes are on the call as well with regards to, Gen Convert, Tractor, etc. But just to mention or highlight a couple things that I don't think have been discussed too much, and is one of which is what's called whitelist v1.1. I think Breen could probably say more about this than I can, but at a high level, there's clearly been a lot of friction with regards to whitelisting assets in the silo, whether for deposit, for conversions, for minting. And not that we'll be at a point where you can click a couple buttons in the UI and get there, but with regards to, development effort, generalizing things like, the oracle that Beanstalk uses to calculate delta B in a particular well, things like that. Generalizing components like that will make it a lot lower friction to whitelist new assets, and obviously the value proposition of whitelisting new assets post gauge system and gen convert is high, I would argue. One of the other things that a few of the people working on both the front end and the contracts talked about yesterday is, even today and over the last, year and a half, there's been, more or less like a handful of problems with people loading their balances, which is very bad. Obviously, that's one of the worst things that the UI could do is show someone that they don't have a balance that they do have, and it's obviously a very bad UX and a very scary UX. And part of the reason that that's the case is that previously Beanstalk was heavily optimized around optimizing gas costs versus, well, basically at the cost of anything else. And in this case in particular, the developer experience of working with the UI. And because there's no view functions that you can just call on Beanstalk to get your deposits given a particular address or get your plots, for example, what the website has to do at the moment is when you load it, it has to read all the events from the beginning of time, or rather from the deployment of Beanstalk, if you will, and parse them manually to determine the state of your balances. And because of that, it has to make a lot of calls to whatever RPC the user is using in their wallet, and we often run into a rate limit. And I think maybe Uncoolzero can chime in, but I believe at one point someone on the front end team told me, was having to make hundreds or maybe even low digit thousands of calls each time the user loads the website. And with these new view functions that we want to add in Beanstalk 3, because the meta, at least in the Beanstalk development community, seems to be shifting away from optimizing for gas costs for optimizing for security, among other things, which has been talked about at previous DAO meetings. That'll be reduced to just one RPC call. And hopefully, or at least I'm pretty excited about the prospect of not having those sorts of issues in the UI anymore. But those are just a couple highlights. See if anyone else wants to chime in, add anything that they're working on.
Well, appreciate that, Guy. Yeah, I mean, if anybody else that's been working on any of these items, if there's anything you want to cover, we'll give you just another quick chance.
And also with regards to my earlier comment around, combining these upgrades and audits in order to, speed up development timelines. If you just, take a look at these slides, take a look at the list of RFCs / the list of RFCs that were listed in the budget proposal for 2024. And I believe that all of them will have been implemented by Beanstalk 3, except for blacklist mitigation, which is pretty exciting.
Agreed.
And then some, of course, as mentioned.
Nasdaq, I just saw your question. We'll come back to it here in a minute. Subgraph and other updates.
I just want to unmute. Did you want to say something, Pizza Man?
Yeah.
Well, I could talk about Gen Flood for a second, I suppose. I don't think
Please.
that has been mentioned much before. Yeah, so the main problem now is that the flood will only flood the highest, not volume, but the highest liquidity well. And so, if hopefully with multiple wells getting whitelisted in the near future, sooner or later, we're going to want to make sure that the flood works correctly for those two. And so, yeah, the code for that doesn't seem to have been too complicated. I feel like it's mostly wrapped up, actually. Probably needs some more review from other contributors and a bit more testing. But yeah, that was not too complex to implement. So hopefully that'll be able to be squeezed in with this upcoming audit here.
Appreciate that. All right. To jump down, so yeah, kind of want to just open up the floor quick for any updates on Subgraph or any other items that haven't been covered thus far in the deck.
Yeah, so I have some stuff to share. You may have seen earlier this week it was announced that we actually have Basin is listed on CoinGecko now. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. There's still some more stuff we need to work with their team on there to, get like all of the historical data available for the different swaps and liquidity and whatnot. But I mean, at least on my end, for like the dev work, like that's all done. So just need to kind of be coordinating with them. And I think that's particularly pretty exciting because, at least a lot of these other these other sites that we were looking to integrate with as well. It's kind of the first thing that has to be done is got to be on CoinGecko. So now that that's done, that kind of opens up some possibilities down the road as well. So I guess more to come with that. And as far as the subgraph is concerned, there was a change. Some new analytics were deployed maybe a couple weeks ago at this point. It was mainly three major things. So the first one is that now we're actually tracking a peg cross when the price of Ether fluctuates. So you'll notice like both in the peg crosses Discord chat and then also on the site on the analytics page, that actual fluctuation without someone having to make a trade. And as a result, there's actually a lot more peg crosses that we weren't tracking previously. So I think the number of peg crosses is actually like 2,000 higher, or like 1,000. I think it's maybe like 17 or 1,800 higher than what we thought it was. Now that we started tracking that since before replant and then after replant. So that was pretty cool. And then we also added support for prices, time, so both the instantaneous prices, time weighted average prices, and then the delta B as well for since like all time before replant. So now when you look on the UI for those charts, if you go to the all-time view, you can actually see everything. So that's also pretty cool. And then the third major thing, this is relating to seed gauge, but this was changed on the analytics ahead of that deployment, which is the updated calculation for the L2SR. So just to talk briefly about that, basically with seed gauge, the L2SR is not including the locked beans. So locked beans are basically those beans that are, it has to do with the unripe. I mean, maybe Breen could explain it better than I could, but it's basically the beans that are locked that can't be withdrawn. Like even if hypothetically everyone were to chop like the amount of beans that would kind of be left over. And so as a result, the L2SR is more like a more accurate value that you can see on the analytics page. I think before I want to say it was maybe like 40-ish%, and now it's 73% on the new calculation I'm seeing. So just, more accurate to reflect the fact that a lot of that supply is locked. And I think that's it for my updates for what's been deployed.
Good stuff. Appreciate it, Soaking. So a couple questions, follow-ups for you in the chat. I see one from Nasdaq saying, what other sites are you looking at integrating with?
Let me see here. Yeah, I have a list that I've written. None of these I've started working on yet, just kind of things that I've taken a note of. It's unclear when these actually get worked on because, at least with a lot of the contract upgrades that are planned and coming up, there's a lot of work that has to be done with that as well. But I have written down here as well, Etherscan, obviously getting the price updated there, which if I haven't actually checked, but if I'm not mistaken, that should be good now that we're on CoinGecko. We want to get on DeFi Llama. We want to get on Dex Screener, DBank, maybe some other ones. I think CoinGecko has like a Gecko Terminal, it was called, which I think the work we did to get on CoinGecko would also be enough to get us on there. We just have to submit the listing once we get the other information finalized with them.
Good stuff. Appreciate that extra information. And Nasdaq said thank you too.
I'll just say related to some of the pre-exploit data that Soaking's been adding to the subgraph, in the form of pre-exploit L2SR, price, delta B, etc., things like that. I guess we already had price, but at least delta B and L2SR, among other things. You'll notice if you're a curious farmer that likes to look at the all-time chart and look at previous Beanstalk data, it's very difficult to read data that's far in the past, and the more time that passes, the more scrunched up everything gets. And on the other hand, on the Basin UI, it's very easy to pick a period in time by just dragging your cursor, or perhaps it's using the scrolling, actually. I don't quite remember off the top of my head, but it's very easy to look back in time at like a particular, date range. And so I think Uncoolzero has been working on a revamp to the analytics UI to be able to do that in the Beanstalk UI for all of those charts, which will be very handy. I think right now when you hover over the pre-exploit price, you can't actually even hover over the $4 peak, which is kind of disappointing.
Good stuff. So I guess, so you mentioned UI updates. Guy, I mean, anything else? You mentioned a discussion that happened yesterday that was really good. Give an opportunity for anybody that was part of that discussion to, to talk about some of the things that were talked about, or anything that they want to add from a UI standpoint, or really any other maintenance or updates. Uncoolzero, want to give you a chance. If there's something you want to talk through, definitely want to give you that opportunity.
Can you guys hear me? That sound good?
Yeah. Yep, you're good.
Awesome. So yeah, like Guy just said, there's a big revamp to the analytics page coming up, and hopefully you'll be able to have more finer control over what kind of data you're seeing and the time range you're seeing, without like relying on the presets that we currently have. So that should make it that page way more powerful and way more useful, actually. So that's coming up. And I believe this was mentioned before, there's some view functions coming up as well. And, sadly, this is something that's, highlight worthy. It shouldn't be, right? The UI should get out of the way and just let the user do its thing. But sadly, due to gas optimizations, we really have to load a lot of data into the UI, and a lot of RPC servers don't support that kind of throughput. So having view functions will really make this a lot easier, and hopefully solve all of our issues coming forward.
Good information. Appreciate that. All right.
Tyler B's question,
Yeah.
who asked, will the setup UI to create wells and whitelist tokens as silo be part of Beanstalk 3? So I believe Space Bean, who recently started working on Beanstalk this week, actually, is working on, first thing that he's working on is the deploy a well page. And that was designed by Sweet Red Beans about a month ago. I think they've done some great work, and so excited to see that go live. I mean, given that governance is still off-chain, I think it's unclear exactly what a whitelisting tokens UI would look like, but it's an interesting point. But from my perspective, step one is being able to deploy the well easily.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make, Guy. That idea of deploying a well being kind of the first step in getting that well whitelisted, and yeah, the idea of being able to do that permissionlessly is great. Well, good. You hit
on a
you hit
related
Tyler.
note, the
Go ahead.
whitelist v1.1 thing that I was talking about earlier with regards to generalizing, whitelisted tokens, oracles, among other things, will make it a lot easier at some point in the future to potentially explore a UI that can do that.
Good stuff. All right, you hit Tyler B's question, which is great. So that gives us the ability to jump back up to Nasdaq's question. So Nasdaq asked, does the team have any plans for how to increase voter engagement? And to just speak for myself, I know that I've thought about this a lot, and I know that a lot of folks are thinking about, how to increase engagement. And one of the difficulties that I run into is, or I would say probably anyone does that's trying to increase engagement or let's call it voter turnout, is just the anonymity of our users. And I know at a couple points in the past, and I personally, did some wallet comparisons and sent secure messages through Etherscan and try my best to reach out to folks, but that even in itself has some limitations. I don't know if there is a really good answer for increasing engagement other than just trying to find as many places as possible to get the word out, and doing whatever individuals can on their own to try to reach out to people they know. I know that there are messages passed back and forth about, hey, has so and so talked to this person, have we reached out to this other person? A lot of those discussions happen between different individuals, but a lot of it is just pavement pounding and trying to figure out who you haven't talked to in a while. I don't know if anybody else has any input, but I know it's been something. I think everybody's been a little bit frustrated about it, but there aren't a lot of really good answers. All right.
I would just echo that, similarly frustrated and similarly think it's unclear exactly. But I think what is clear is that, the community's ability to do that, and, in terms of like getting people to participate, whether for or against, was kind of gonna, make or break how these next couple BIPs go. So, feel like this is one of the best forums to bring up ideas for that and talk about it. So would encourage people to do so if they have any.
So a couple of folks are typing, but NASDAQ followed up with, how do we expect to pass quorum reduction in that case? And I would say that that's not completely clear. I think that there'll be an effort that goes along with that, just like there's been an effort with the other BIPs that are currently up, and just gonna be a pull by the community. Okay, looking through, I see Tyler Naz typing.
Rex, I think we missed Sophocles' question.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Yep. No, sorry about that, Sophocles. So, all right. Sophocles writes, do we think there's benefit in making the budget BIPs as the yes/no vote for protocol updates? It seems rather annoying that we have to vote for both the work or what to work on and then also to push the development. Was there an initial reason for doing it this way? So I'll give a quick answer and anybody certainly can follow up. As I've understood this concept historically, really, so why we've got separate votes, it's because it's kind of two fundamentally different concepts. The first is, the budget BIP is to spend funds, to spend the funds of the DAO, and then the BIPs to actually push development work are more focused on the idea that with the passage of that BIP, there's going to be a change to the protocol code itself that will be implemented. And because those ideas are separate, there is a desire to have the votes be separate. And of course, if someone understands that differently, if I've got a misunderstanding, definitely jump in. But that's historically how it's been discussed. And I guess I would also say, to get back to the actual question, there's a lot of different ways to potentially approach governance, and if there are ideas from the community about potentially changing that part of the approach, it's certainly worth bringing up in discussion. Sorry, Guy, go ahead.
No worries. I was just going to say that, the issue is that at the time of the budget proposal, the proposed work is not implemented yet. And, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that, every individual farmer is like auditing the code personally. But in particular, for a lot of these BIPs, there are parameters that need to be decided on somehow by the community and by the DAO. In the case of the gauge system, there's probably more than 5 in the form of the target seasons to catch up, the minimum being to max LP ratio, the maximum ratio, et cetera. And because the work isn't implemented at the time of the budget proposal, it almost can't really be known what those parameters will even end up being until that work is further designed. So, perhaps there's an argument to make that quorum should be structured differently for minting beans versus protocol upgrades. But on the other hand, you can just upgrade the protocol to, add a function that mints beans. So it's like hard to really draw a line between the two, but who knows? Maybe there's something there. I'm not sure.
Appreciate the additional color there, Guy. So NASDAQ followed up with some questions about having Ben be part of the meeting or have him talking. I can't answer really on his behalf. I would definitely encourage you to reach out to him if you want to ask, though. So Tyler B follows up. One of the things he can help is get the DAO more involved in what features the dev should work on next. For each feature, devs can give more explanation on how it will grow the protocol. I believe this could help. Definitely a good suggestion. I know there's been discussion about a prioritization process. I've been thinking about that myself over the last handful of weeks. The other thing that I have come to understand again over the last few weeks is just how much the devs are working on, and the amount of work that they are doing. I do think there probably is there's room for some type of DAO involvement in making those suggestions to what should be worked on next, and having a good robust discussion about what the priorities are, what the DAO thinks they should be. I also think looking at especially the work that's been worked on for or that's currently being worked on for Beanstalk 3, the devs are pretty well stacked up in terms of their schedule for really through the summer into the early fall. So I think there probably is a place for that ability to have additional input. I would also say it probably wouldn't have a big impact until, we're into that fall period. So something we can think about between now and then. But yeah, there's room for this suggestion process. We can figure out what it might look like, over these next few months. Nasdaq asked, any thoughts on the EBIP idea? Admittedly, I'm not familiar with the EBIP idea.
I mean, I wasn't able to talk earlier, so I've been
No, you're
texting,
good.
but I posted it in the chat. But also just like the EBIP, EBIP is pretty broad. It's for protecting Beanstalk. If we assume that Beanstalk can't pass anything, is it a protection to actually just be able to change the quorum or something? Because otherwise we stagnate and might die. And especially nobody's voting against it. So it's just inactive stock. Or are we just going to wait until there's enough active stock? But the longer we wait, the more it becomes inactive.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I'd say it's definitely a point of frustration. And of course, someone else can jump in if they'd like. My understanding of the EBIP process, I'm glad you pointed me to your comment in general, because though familiar with the EBIPs, I didn't have the context around that particular question. As I understand them, EBIPs are used primarily in the event that something actively dangerous to the protocol or that would cause either immediate failure or some type of immediate issue were to happen. That's the context in which an EBIP would be used. So, I guess it raises the question of, at what point does the community think that we've crossed that line? It seems like that wouldn't necessarily be the right use of an EBIP, but I'm sure it's probably something worth discussing.
Guy, do you have any thoughts about it?
I'd have to take a look at the language, but just, philosophically speaking, and speaking as an individual participant in Beanstalk, I feel like that would totally undermine the concept of the multisig.
I agree. I just don't see how we're going to pass anything to reduce quorum or pass anything. I don't know. Unless we keep minting and then people come back. I think that's the only...
Yeah, it's hard to know. I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I figured I'd ask you since you wrote it. Yeah. I also think the other thing, like I said in my comments, is if Ben was out there talking to people, I think that inspired a lot of people. So it'd be interesting to know where Ben's at.
I think that'd be a good message to shoot to Ben, frankly. I don't disagree with you in the sense that I think that, he's a very smart guy with a lot of, really good insight. And, I think passing that, let's say that, those compliments along to him, I think is worth it, because, he wants what's best for Beanstalk. So yeah, I think that'd be a good thing to pass along. So Tyler B asks, do the devs think about what will be good utilities for Bean in the DeFi ecosystem? Personally, based on what I would say is becoming a better and better view of the folks that are working on Beanstalk, what I see is a group of developers that want to build a really solid set of functions and internal capabilities for our users. There's a lot of focus around, what can be done to make Beanstalk and Basin work really well, with the desire to make a really good, really safe, really useful user experience. Hard to speculate on anybody's priorities outside of that, but there is a lot of active work focused on making the local experience really good, really safe, really efficient, and really robust. And I think it is safe to say that what goes along with that is the concept that the better the local ecosystem gets, the more attractive it'll become. And we've been going through some really interesting cycles recently. Obviously it was a pretty good day for cryptocurrency in general, and DeFi yesterday. But it seems like the goal within this team, as I see it, is building a really good experience that people can come to and use, and with the hope that as that happens, it'll draw more interest from the outside. Again, that's just me thinking out loud. Anybody else can definitely comment if they see something different or additional. Okay, at the bottom of the chat for the voice channel, don't worry, Harry, I do see your ultimatum too. But at the bottom of the voice channel, I don't see anything. Tyler B's question, we got that in the Barnyard chat, so that's good. Excuse me. And I don't see anything else in general. So I will give one more minute just for closing comments in case anybody has anything to add, and then we'll let everybody go. Okay. Hearing nothing additional, one more time, if you haven't gotten a chance to already, go over and vote. Love to see these BIPs pass and be able to keep moving forward. We will keep everybody updated as voting closes. And thanks again for your time, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.